Welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. Today, we're talking about using conversation to begin understanding around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Joining us today is a fantastic panel, so I'm really excited that everyone's here. We have with us Dr. Wise, and Dr. Wise is the principal consultant at her own firm, which supports organizations on the topics of diversity, equity, inclusion, governance, and leadership. She's also a faculty member at the Graduate School of Education at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, where she teaches on topics of diversity, equity, inclusion, and issues of social justice. She's been an educator for more than 25 years and has served at the head of school of several independent schools. We also have Lloyd, who is a local activist and a recent St. Anne's School graduate. He is a founder of nonprofit Superior Future, which focuses on bringing educational and recreational programs to low-income communities. And then we also have Andrea Weiss, and she has had nearly 2 decades of education experience and is currently the head of school at St. Anne's School of Annapolis. She's published research on faculty professional development and motivation and engagement in the classroom. So a huge thank you to all 3 of you for being here today. To our viewers, please feel free to submit any questions or comments that you have in the comments section, and we will try to get to as many as we can today. So let's jump right in. These are big topics, and I only have you here for a little bit of time, but let's really start to get in the weeds. We are talking about social and racial justice issues today and how to move forward with productive conversations. Let's start with racial identity. What does it mean to build and have a strong racial identity? And Val, let's start with you. And just feel free to sort of jump in and give us your 2 cents, and then we'll sort of give everyone some time and space to share their ideas on that.
Well, I love talking about this topic because I think it's so important especially for young people and for parents in general, to understand that racial identity is not something to be afraid of. But in fact, all of us, no matter what your race, no matter what your ethnicity, that we need to have this strong racial identity. And what it really means is it means that you have a sense that there's a strength about who you are as an African American, as an Asian American, that you have an asset. Because you can point back to, for instance, individuals who have supported this country with their work ethic. So understanding who you are within this stream of time, being able to read about that, seeing what we call windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. So a window is you get to see out into the world about what others are doing and how that impacts you. But a mirror is being able to see yourself. So in the literature that you read, in stories that you hear from your family, all those are really great foundations. And then the sliding glass door is even more important because not only do you have to read about it, but you need to go out and experience it. So experiencing your own culture and celebrating that, and then experiencing cultures of others, helping you build a strong racial identity and an appreciation for all the things that we all bring to this wonderful fabric that we have of a culture.
Absolutely. Andrea, what about you? What does it mean to build and have a strong racial identity?
Well, I want to play off of what Val was talking about with windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. When I think about it as a head of school, and what are we trying to build in our children, that strong sense of who you are, what your place in the world could be, that you as a person in the world, you don't have to settle. You can begin to go outside and you can begin to have an impact, whether you're in 3rd grade. Harold tells a great story about 3rd grade. Whether you're in 3rd grade, graduate school, or an adult moving on. And so I really see school as the place where that starts. And so as Val has said, what are the children reading? What are the children seeing? Who are they interacting with? The faculty that they're interacting with? Where in the world do they go? How does the school facilitate that so that they can get out and experience those cultures, and not just their own, but others? Because you can walk in your own shoes, but I don't think you really understand who you are until you walk in the shoes of others as well.
So it's really important, Andrea, to have the school play a role in this discussion of racial identity, and not only how to foster your own, but how to give you perspective on others. That's sort of what I'm hearing from you.
Absolutely. And, it comes into the moniker of social emotional education.
Mhm.
Well, that's a piece of it. But we also have to be clear about our curriculum. And, I'll go right to what are my seventh graders reading right now? And in that racially diverse group, are they seeing themselves in the books that they're reading, in the topics that the faculty are choosing to teach across the school? And that, actually some of the research that Val had done early on about our very young learners and how they need to see themselves. So are the baby dolls there in ways that children can recognize that that baby doll is just like them? And so whether it's a Black baby doll, a white baby doll, an Asian baby doll, all the way to what is the social curriculum within a school. And so it takes work, it takes thought, and then there's the work to do with the faculty in order to present that in a way that makes it meaningful for the students who are at the school.
Mm-hmm.
If I could piggyback on Andrea just for a moment.
Definitely.
One of the challenges for schools in general is that while, specifically for African Americans, they will say, well, we're doing a culturally responsive curriculum, but they're only showing those pieces of slavery or the negative parts of civil rights and not celebrating the whole part of what is African American culture, specifically in Annapolis, for instance. And celebrating all pieces of that. So you don't want to have this continuing to be the one message, but have a multiplicity of stories that go around each culture that's within your school. And I think that's one of the things St. Anne's is working so hard to be able to do.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Harold, can I hear just a little bit from your perspective, both as a student maybe at St. Anne's, but then also as your current work when you're working with your own students in terms of the role that racial identity plays?
Well, I think, racial identity is very imperative because it explains about who you are, where do you come from and what you will be in the future, or which direction, a trajectory your race is going in the future, and how will they intertwine with other races. Because we know from past history is that a lot of our races, a lot of our cultures, ethnic groups, they all intertwine with one another. It's just they're probably not intertwining at the current time that we're speaking of, but I can talk about in 1900s when Africans in Haiti, Africans and the French collided, and that's how we got Haiti. And then talk about Africans who went to Brazil. It's a lot of Black Brazilians down there who come from African descent. So, and even in Europe. So going to Germany when we all came together, it's certain things that we don't discuss because, racial identity is such a broad topic. It's so broad that people are forced to, just settle with what they think they are. But in reality, there were so many races, so many cultures put together in our past history, which creates us today. So it's a very detailed discussion. But at the end of the day, it's trying to figure out who you truly are at the moment, and what you're going to be in. What are you bringing to the table as far as for your race and your identity, and how will your path be in the future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I can see the importance of trying to foster that early, especially with children, in whatever capacity that you can, whether that be in school or in an after school program or at home within a family itself. So let's talk about those conversations. As a former teacher, I know that so much understanding comes from conversation. And I know that as good citizens, it's our responsibility to have these challenging conversations. How do you suggest that we go about it? So in this moment of time, both parents at home, but then also from that teacher educator perspective. And Val, let's start with you again.
So what I love to do is, especially for let's start talking developmentally. For our very young children, so many parents will say to me, but Val, I want them to continue to have that innocence. And we don't want to talk about these kinds of negative things like this. Well, here's the thing. The reality is that young children are not colorblind. There's some great work by Dr. Karen Ritz, who is at Yale University in the Baby Lab. And you can Google her, she's pretty phenomenal. But what she talks about is the fact that even as early as 6 months old, the bias, this kind of bias will kind of it's insidious. It kind of gets right in with young children. We're kind of born with a bias. And unless parents really think about how do I balance my child out and give them all kinds of experiences with a variety of things, then they will become very kind of locked into that one thought process. So this is again where great literature, great music, great videos can really help. And that gives a start to a conversation. I know I was speaking with one professor at Hopkins not too long ago, and we were talking about the fact that imagine if a child's library within their room had literally books of a variety of cultures, that every day or every couple times a day, a different cultural group was explored in depth, and questions were answered, and food was tried, and music was listened to. And then you have play dates and play groups with those individuals that you really widen out. So think about starting as early as 6 to 8 months old. The research is telling us that's an important part of really helping children to have that conversation. But then also be really focused on listening to what your child is saying and not being afraid to jump in when they're saying something that you realize it's probably not the best perspective or not a real perspective. So don't be afraid of that conversation or kind of push it under the rug. The third biggest thing, I think, is that we have to search our own selves and do the internal work that's necessary. We kind of think, well, we're just going to talk to them, but I'm not going to do any work myself. Well, where do you stand on a spectrum of understanding anti-bias or anti-racism? Where are you on that? Have you done your research? Do you understand the cultural ramifications that are going on in the country right now? Can you speak to them? And then answer the questions, not hiding that, but really having a great discussion and listening to what they're saying and really giving them real information. If you don't know, look it up and tell them, I don't know. Especially for middle schoolers who are struggling to try to determine who they are. I think Carol said it so beautifully. They're trying to find themselves. They want real answers. So help them do the research. You do the research yourself, but come together and have those great conversations.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Val, in terms of making it tangible. So talking about food and music and books, like those are really great resources for parents to be like, oh yeah, I can do that. And then I think looking in the mirror and having those hard conversations yourself as a parent. And then also letting the child guide those conversations, where you said, sometimes a kid might say something that might make you cringe a little bit, but that's such an amazing teachable moment. So dive in and move forward and take that opportunity as it presents itself. So that's really helpful.
I want to give you a great experience I had once in the grocery store where a white mother was walking with her little 3-year-old, I think. And the little girl pointed at me and said, "Mommy, she is so dark," right? Now, the mom could have said, "Oh my God, please don't, that's not nice to say." In fact, the mom said, "Yes, isn't she beautiful?" That was taking an opportunity to say, "I'm celebrating this. Yes, I appreciate that you've seen the difference. And let's talk about how beautiful that difference is." So I had to say to the mom, "That was amazing what you just said." And it's a classic example of being comfortable with conversations about race and not afraid to kind of walk through that door when your child opens it for you. And that child absolutely did.
Right. Yeah. 3-year-olds, they don't hide anything.
They will absolutely tell you the truth.
Andrea, what about you? In terms of your role as head of school, how do you think about having these conversations with your students or prepping your teachers to have these conversations with students?
I think it's truly important to listen and listen hard and not walk away from the hard conversation, but rather open the door to that conversation. And so what does that require? Well, faculty have to be comfortable enough to say, okay, somebody's asking a question, a middle schooler, a third grader is asking a question. I myself, as that teacher, I might feel uncomfortable, but if I don't acknowledge it and give voice to that child, then what is that child learning? That child is learning to be silent. That child is learning something about that faculty member that maybe isn't true, but in order to become comfortable, we have to work with our discomfort. And that's for faculty. And, the thing that saddens me is when I hear from a student, well, my voice has been silenced. I feel like I don't have an outlet, or, can you help me have this conversation? We have a student-led DEIJ group, and they are incredible. They are so happy to have this place where they can be heard, where they can have this uncomfortable sometimes conversation, but it's open, it's honest, it's with one another, it's with faculty as faculty choose to engage. And so providing those outlets for student voice, especially around difficult conversations of anti-racism and racial identity and racial injustice, that's critical for a school to engage in. And so providing the supports to faculty to practice those hard conversations, to understand, as Val said, know yourself, so you know where your biases live. Everybody's biased in one way or another. And so if you do the work to understand your bias, then you are more able to have those conversations. And that's a constant conversation here at St. Anne's with the faculty, is how can we be better at enabling those conversations? How can we be better at opening those doors for the students who want to have those conversations and recognize that they happen at any grade level? It's not just a high school thing. It can happen in second grade. It can happen in pre-kindergarten as well as 7th or 8th grade.
And I'm also hearing from you that you're having these conversations on all levels. So not only in the classroom, but you as head of school are making sure that you're having these conversations with your faculty as well and giving them the resources that they need. And so it's something that parents should be thinking about too, is that not only do they need to be having these conversations with their students, but they need to be having these conversations with each other and with family. And it should be surrounding us at all times, and just diving into these topics.
And honestly, I'm sorry, go ahead, Andrea.
I was just going to say, absolutely. And, it starts with our, we're an independent school. We have a board of trustees. We have to have those conversations at the board level as well, because that leadership is critical, and engaging the parents in the conversations. We have to do that if we're going to be able to move forward as a community and as a society and as a community in Annapolis even.
Absolutely. So Harold, as your experience, you're working with students and youth as well in terms of your work with Superior Future. How do you start to have these conversations, and what is your role in moving these conversations forward?
It's most definitely a gradual process, because their minds are still developing. But how I really try to attack it is that I ask them, how do they feel? What do they think? And what do they think that they know about it? So it's just pretty much asking them who they are. Are you familiar with everything that's going on in the country right now? Are you familiar about the past? As we go back to the first question, is knowing about where you come from, or what type of struggles your people had to go through, get you into this position that you're at today. Because we can go to the younger level, first grade, second grade, that's where you kind of started at, is that you all didn't have the ability to always go to school with one another. And that teaches them how to appreciate one another more and love one another more, because, their grandparents or great grandparents didn't have the same opportunity first, second, third grade, just to look over and see a kid of a different race, learning about a different culture. You were kind of trapped in together, well, confined together with individuals who only look like you. So you only knew about yourself and the same similar cultures over and over again. And then as they start getting older, to like the 9-year-old, the 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, that's when you start asking them the questions that may become uncomfortable. Do you know what happened to George Floyd? Do you know what happened to Breonna Taylor? Do you actually know the type of treatment that Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks really had to go through? Not just they fought so hard to make sure that we were equal. That they were getting beat up. People who followed them, some of them were killed, spat on. Kids were books were thrown at kids were getting cussed out by parents. And it's them understanding that part, and then it's understanding that, well, everybody from that race was not like that.
Hmm.
Because it was individuals just like them, who looked just like them, but were behind Martin Luther King, who were for NAACP, who helped funded the sit-ins, the freedom rides. So it's making sure that you understand that, yes, there were some horrible people from way back when, but everyone wasn't like that. And when you look around today, everyone still isn't like that. But you have to be able to comfortable with having conversations like this so you can understand who is like the good people and who are the bad people who have those type of mindsets. And then once I get to 13, 14, that's when I kind of cut it raw to them, because you're hitting high school, and I break your true innocence before someone else breaks it to you, who will not be able to guide you in the right direction to have a better mindset of really what's going on, understanding what you can do instead of just being a negative. I'm also going to help you, be very positive. Like, yes, what happened to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor should have never happened. But you have the ability to finish school. You have the ability to become a lawyer, a legislator, a police officer. So situations like this will never happen, and the power will be in your hand. So it's also about developing them with their identity to understand that they aren't weak, they aren't powerless, they aren't voiceless, and they are actually the future. And my generational sacrifice right now is to ensure that their future will be better than mine. But their job in the future is going to be to ensure that that good pattern is still going on, that we are still living by correct values and we still have morals, instead of regressing and going back to corrupted ways from the past.
Yeah, definitely. Harold, that makes me think about how do we get children to understand that they do have a responsibility to the rest of the world, but also what their role is and how we create that sense of belonging for them. And so they can discover exactly what you're talking about, moving this conversation forward, moving this hard work forward. And so my question is really, how do we go about doing that? How do we help kids see where they are in the world right now and in the future? Andrea, let's start with you and how you sort of start to foster that understanding.
So service and service learning. And there's a difference between the two. Services will go out into the community and, have the kids work at a food bank. Service learning then is we're teaching about food insufficiency. We're looking at how food comes to a particular area, how food is distributed, what are the injustices around how that food might be distributed, what are the economics. So really taking something like food insufficiency and teaching children, not just Harold tells a great story about making sandwiches in third grade and learning how to give back, because that's what service is going to help the children do, but then really taking it deeper into the curriculum and saying, okay, I want to learn about hunger in my community, and what does that look like, and what does that look like from a social perspective, from an economic perspective, from a historical perspective, and then what can I do? What is the advocacy piece? So teaching about advocacy as well. So it's really this full continuum of not just the service piece, but everything around that as well. And so in schools we call that service learning, and it's really that thoughtful integration into the curriculum.
Harold, I got to hear this sandwich story. I got to hear the story about you in third grade and sandwiches. So let's hear it.
This was one of like my earlier days when I realized that I loved helping people. It was we had this do you all still do that for the Lighthouse Shelter?
We do, but COVID has kind of
yeah
gotten in the
COVID.
way. Yeah.
So it was this program we used to have in elementary school at St. Anne's. We would give a lunch bag to individuals who come to the Lighthouse Shelter. So it was probably like one of my favorite days of the year, besides like field trips. You know, people bring apples, people bring cheese, people bring the meat, the bread, and the drink. And we would get like the forward assembly line, and we all pass it down, pass it down, pass it down. So if someone would give me the sandwich, I'll put the sandwich in the bag, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, as I was doing like the forward assembly line, I just loved it. Like I couldn't wait for that day, because I'm like, yes, yes, we're about to do this. We're about to give them lunches. You know, I'm so happy that I get to do this. But at the time, I didn't realize that I loved it for the part of it about helping other people. It's like, okay, I'm making, because, you know, when you're young, your parents make your lunch. So it's like, you know, this is my first responsibility, is now that I'm going to help make a lunch to feed someone else. So it's kind of like, now I have a responsibility, now I have authority. But it was really me falling in love with the fact that I get to help people who are less fortunate. And I know that this lunch was going to give them a smile, you know, and that they weren't going to be hungry anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They get to be energized with this healthy food. That's how I'm energized all day. And, you know, that was one of my first times that I fell in love with helping people, because I was young. I didn't really like understand it back then, but as I grew up, you know, and that memory is always embedded in the back of my head. It's just, that's where it all started pretty much.
Yeah, you can really see first how it shaped who you are today and the work that you're doing now, and
Thank
sort
you.
of the power of the service learning curriculum, and having that integrated from a really young age, and really creating all the work that you do today. Val, could you just talk a little bit about how you go about helping children, or helping, since you're working with, you know, future teachers and educators, how to help them help youth see where they fit in the bigger picture?
Well, I think Harold did a beautiful job, Harold and Andrea both, in really kind of underlining exactly what the process is. Because now we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we add a B. And the B is belonging. And so the social curriculum, you just saw what Harold, I mean, he did it so eloquently, that his sense of belonging to St. Anne's, because he still remembers that, came from this idea of giving back to others, and then understanding who he was in the stream of time, and who he was as an African-American male at St. Anne's, helping support that identity development. That's what teachers need to be able to do as well, creating a space within their classrooms where students feel free to make mistakes, to ask questions, and to learn more about themselves and others. If we can provide that, that is the ultimate in education. The rest comes. Learning about math, that's nice. Reading is great. But the reality is, the good stuff, that's what he's talking about. That belonging, that sense of purpose, that's the good stuff. And that's why we have education. It's not just to learn to read and write. It really is to figure out our place in the world. So hats off to an organization, to a school that can do just that. And so that's what I try to talk to educators as well as counselors at Hopkins. We talk about this idea of understand who you are as an individual, who your own racial identity is. Where are you on your racial identity development? And then you certainly can support your students within your classroom, or your clients in their racial development as well, and understand how important that is, because you're then looking at your whole self, and you're seeing these children as their whole selves, and not just a fraction of who they are, but all their stories that they bring to the school, from their families, their languages they speak, the foods that they eat, how we celebrate all of those pieces authentically for them. And that's really how belonging starts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I hear too, you know, with service learning, sort of the power of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're talking about too, Val, is, you know, not only are you exploring your identity, but you're doing it through being in the world and actually working through these issues and experience it. And I think Harold's story is just that. Um, I want to ask one more question, squeeze it in. So this has been a crazy year, every way you could possibly look at it. We've really experienced a lot of bumpiness in the road on our journey this year. How can we be more present? How can we move forward in a positive sense? And how do we go about doing that for our children and our students and the youth out there? Harold, I want to start with you. When you're thinking about the future and reflecting upon this year, how do you sort of move forward in a positive way?
Well, to move forward in positive ways is always being very receptive, because I think an issue during my middle school days was that we never really had a conversation or an area for, the kids or myself at the time to just release what we were going through, what we were feeling, what we were thinking about, what was going on, everything that was surrounding us. And I think that would have been very beneficial if we had a day or a period in the class or during our break, that 15-minute break we used to get, where we could just talk about stuff like that. Because when Trayvon Martin happened, that was a pivotal time in a lot of my classmates' lives, because this was my eighth grade year is when it happened. My class was 55% Black. So all of the Black kids, we kind of came together and we were talking about the situation. But it was like we couldn't really talk about it with our white classmates because they didn't even know what was going on. And I don't really know if our teachers even knew what was going on at the time. So it was an awkward moment for us because we just became teenagers. There's a lot going on. We're all about to go to high school next year. We still have a lot of these thoughts in the back of our mind, and then we see a Black kid dying at the age of 17. We're going to high school next year, so it was like really hard on us because we was like, oh, that could have been us, but we had nobody to talk to about that situation. And that was one of the situations that sparked the Black Lives Matter movement. So during the time, we didn't know that it would become what it became today, and how pivotal the movement is of highlighting social injustices. But at the time, we would have appreciated if we could go to our teachers about that. And the thing was, I don't think we couldn't have. I think our teachers would have been receptive. It was just there was never a time where something like this happened, and we didn't know how our teachers would react. So we just thought it was smarter to keep our feelings bottled in and just keep the emotions, because there was no open platform ever at a point in time where teachers opened up to us and said, what's going on? How do you feel? If it's positive or negative. It was just come to class, go to our field trips, make sure you're just doing great in class and have fun at recess. But it was never the reality of the world, what was society going through, and how do we feel as pre-teenagers at the time.
Mm-hmm. So I hear you talking about the power of peer support and the power of community, and then also in what you're doing now, the power of mentorship and being there for each other and for the community. And like, I think the work that you're doing right now is providing that. And so a way to move forward in a positive way is exactly what you're doing now, in a really powerful way. Dr. Val, or Dr. Weiss, how do you go about that? How do you stay positive? How do you take into account this year, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and also not experience burnout?
That's a really great question. I do want to go back a little bit to, though, what you started at the start of this, our half hour. You opened it up by talking about conversation and how important conversation and communication was. I think what this year has shown us, COVID, Zoom, Black Lives Matter, all of that, is that how important it really has underscored the ability to have positive conversations, courageous conversations, and giving yourselves the tools. So I think that's what energizes me, is the fact that we now have great research. I'm conducting it myself with some colleagues at Hopkins. There's lots of writing out there about how to have those courageous conversations and how to open doors and have a safe space, especially for our students. Harold's experience is one that says they are ready to have these spaces. We have to provide those spaces for them. So helping individuals create those safe spaces and then allowing that to happen, and then structuring it so that something happens after that moves the whole organization forward. That's my party place. That's my happy spot. I love that part,
Yeah, definitely. Andrea, how about you? How to take 2020 and reflect upon it and move forward in a positive way and sort of prepare for a better future?
I agree with Val, and I think what Harold has said is just it is so poignant, in that we can't afford not to have those courageous conversations. moving forward. It's the only way we'll move forward, and making space for students, again, whatever age they're at, to ask questions, to make their feelings known, to help them process what's happening in the world. I completely agree with Val. Math is going to happen. Spelling is going to happen, but being able to build safe spaces for those conversations, to build identity, to build racial identity, and to build this idea of belonging in the world, and trying on not different identities, but trying on, where do I belong and how can I best belong? What does it mean to belong to a community? What does it mean to care for that community? And I think that's the work that we all have coming ahead for us. And schools are a very special place because we want to build students who are creative and curious, but also courageous, that they can, and you don't hear the courageous part a lot, but we want our students to be able to take those next steps, to become advocates for the wrongs that they see, and take the actions, just like Harold is doing today.
I just to put a coda on that, Andrea, Maslow talks about the hierarchy of needs. We've all remembered that. And the highest one is self-actualization. And I would argue that Harold is showing you what self-actualized means, that he understands his racial identity. He recognizes that all of these pieces need to be in place, but then he takes that and goes out into the world and makes a difference. That's what we really want that for our students. And that's what makes this world a better place. That's what will change the things that we've seen today that are going on in the world.
Absolutely. The power of being a citizen and making change, moving democracy forward. Well, thank you so much to everyone for being here today, to Dr. Val Wise, to Harold Lloyd, and Andrea Weiss for being here to talk to us about justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and how to have those conversations around these topics. Thank you to all of our viewers and listeners as well. Make sure that you visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. A special shout out to St. Anne's for helping put this together. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in video and podcast format. I'm Janet Jefferson with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Thank you.